thing.
Let's also look at our stress levels.
Oh, that's number one.
Number one.
I have to fire some people.
Oh, it's there are certain things you got to fix about your life. You're stressed about some stuff.
Yeah, I got to fire
Make
more
some
people.
change. Yeah.
How is your psoriasis?
It's getting better, man.
It looks good.
Yeah, I fired some people and it's getting better.
And what started me getting fired was like, I couldn't come in for Schaub show because I was with my wife in Vegas and had planned to come earlier, but couldn't. Like, so if you're a comic, Brendan talks shit about you. If you've met Brendan and you're a comic.
He did in the sink.
Oh, multiple times a day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The creative director, Mike Nell, who's a great guy, he communicated with him, hey man, this really bothers me. You know what I mean? Like, this really bothers me.
Hey dude, Brendan is a narcissistic asshole who lies to people and defames them behind their back. That's not the kind of guy that I feel any sort of loyalty to protect his nature now.
These past few weeks have been pretty intense for Brendan Schaub ever since his former handler, Mark Harley, decided to declare war on him and expose some pretty wild stuff about Schaub after getting fired. Ever since then, Mark has been on multiple podcasts, including The Red Bar Show. He went on another podcast trashing Letterman and Khalyla, and also explained why he got fired, revealed some pretty intense secrets about Schaub and the entire operation over at Thick Boy. And surprisingly, Mark is now welcomed by the Fighter and the Kid subreddit who once hated him. And it's actually pretty entertaining. And at first, I thought it was another Malik situation, but as time passes by and Mark reveals more stuff, it's actually growing into something pretty wild. So here's everything that has been happening in the entire Mark Harley and Brendan Schaub drama. So let's get into it.
You know, one time for Tiger Thick, we blew up over, he asked for something that I couldn't have gotten like the next day, like, and I couldn't go back and get it. He's like, "Did you guys get videos of the winner who were there last night?" I'm like, "No, but you didn't ask for that." And he's like, "God, not one of you," like he kind of doubles down, and like, it's very classic him. He'll ask for things after the fact. There was a few moments like that. And the most recent one that actually led to my firing was I couldn't come in for a Monday. I was in Las Vegas with my wife, and you know, this whole time I was driving on the road with Schaub, literally working 7 days a week for him, supposed to do his security. I'm on call when I'm home to do his social media. It was like, my whole life was like working for this guy because he doesn't have any boundaries. The final thing I'll just repeat was I was in Vegas and I couldn't come in on Monday for the Schaub show. Now, the Schaub show is under the Thick Boy Network. I didn't know this at the time, but he had taken me off of the Thick Boy payroll, which is one of 3 sources that I get paid from. At the time when he reprimanded for me not being able to come in, I had called one of my coworkers and said, "Hey, could you cover the duties that I'm supposed to do in the room?" They said yes. I did that ahead of time. I contacted Schaub ahead of time, and I still got reprimanded in a way where I felt like it was just a little bit like, "Hey, I didn't even take the week off after Christmas."
About a month ago, people started to notice that Mark Harley wasn't on the Fighter and the Kid podcast anymore, which caused them to speculate that he was actually fired. Back then, Mark wasn't liked by the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, so they thought that he was just fired because of how unpopular and hated he was on the show. And listen, when the whole thing went down and Mark decided to come out against Brendan Schaub, I did think at first that he was just salty because he wasn't getting paid anymore and was doing this for attention. But after listening to everything that Mark has said so far, it does sound like there are actual feelings and there is tension between them, between him and Brendan Schaub.
I defended myself saying like, "Hey man, we're fixating on the fact that I didn't text you back for a few hours. Maybe you have your priorities out of whack." So obviously he didn't like that, fired me in the group text, you know, said he was going to pay me for the month of February, has not done that.
Cool. And he didn't pay you, which is like the worst thing he did.
Yeah. What started me getting fired was like, I couldn't come in for Schaub show because I was with my wife in Vegas and had planned to come earlier, but couldn't, like, so, and I'm sending this like, anxiety ridden text like, "Hey dude, I'm so sorry I can't come in." But like, I texted the other guy, he can cover my thing. And he was like, "This is not good." He sent me this shitty text. Made it awkward. Like had I not get fired, I was going to have to take that on the chin. But like, this was 7 months of ad reads for Happy Hippo. And it was like, "Oh yeah, instead of $7,000, you're going to get 3,500.
Yeah.
Oh. That's a significant amount. Ooh, instead of 3 months of Tiger Thick, that's $9,000, you're going to get 4,500. Okay, that's $10,000.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, that's a big amount of money to me, you know?
Although Mark admits that he made a mistake, it does sound like it was a scenario where things were just heating up for months or for a while, and this little incident was just what blew everything up, because it's just something so simple, something so easy to fix, but maybe the overreaction was fueled by months of mistreatment and just bad energy overall. Now, here's what's interesting. Bryan Callen was actually one of the ones to suggest to Schaub that he should fire Mark Harley. But then when Mark decided to, come out and share his experience working for Brendan Schaub, Callen went after Mark Harley, or went to Mark Harley and tried to talk him out of doing what he was doing. So clearly Brendan Schaub even has his own friends giving him horrible advice.
Apparently, this source tells me Callen goes to Brendan and is like, dude, I honestly don't know what play you have here other than to fire this guy. This is Bryan Callen saying to Brendan. This is the story coming from the Schaub situation over here.
Yes, the Bryan thing would actually make sense because
okay,
he seemed really like, oh my God, Mark, can't you admit that you're wrong? Like, in this text message the next day, I'm like, no, I'm not going to admit that I'm wrong, because all I did was not text you back and you got the work. It's just insane. Callen called me repeatedly. We had a normal conversation where he's trying to convince me to not go on this. Like, oh my God, this is just insane. He was trying to get me to not go do this Reddit MMA, and he was kind of making things seem like, hey, he's giving me this philosophical angle. He eventually persuaded me to get on the phone. He starts talking to me, like I could tell he's doing this angle of like, Mark, I really want you to think about this. It's not going to be good for your future, blah, blah, blah.
And this is when things start to get very interesting, because the host of the show actually had statements coming from the Thick Boy camp and from Brendan Schaub himself. And that is the closest that Brendan Schaub has come to addressing this entire situation. And it also confirms that they both are aware of the massive nukes that Mark Harley is dropping on them. Now, in my opinion, the statements were a little bit weak, but Mark had some pretty interesting rebuttals for all of them.
We have, like I said, we have some friends and some connections that are close to Brendan. So yeah. I do have their side of the story. He was missing work all the time.
Ha 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 ha.
So that's false.
Ha ha ha. Oh my goodness. Did I miss one single day? I didn't miss a single day.
Now this is from their camp. Okay, showing up late, just all around being super unreliable. So showing up late, have you showed up late?
Late for what?
I guess for work, I guess. I don't know.
I'm an editor. I work from home. I run social media. I almost can't be late. And also, I'm working around the clock. So, thank you for showing me this, because this is the most insane rebuttal I've ever heard in my life.
They said that he said he needed to talk to you, and you went crazy. Screamed at Schaub and hung up on him. So then there's more. There's more. Do you want to rebut to this, or you want to keep going?
The rebuttal to that is, I've never had a phone conversation with Schaub since getting fired. Since he texted me and tried to meet up with me, it's getting my heart rate going, because I'm like, this guy is just lying. He's a pathological liar, and he's proving that right in, with these quotes.
It is shocking how long Mark was working for Brendan Schaub and how loyal he was to Schaub, because Mark would spend hours and hours arguing with people online, arguing with haters, people from the subreddit, and trying to defend Brendan Schaub with actual arguments, long paragraphs, point by points, and all of that stuff. He was also very passionate about doing his solo podcast on the Thick Boy Network. And I say that to say this. Everybody obviously knew that Mark was your assistant, your handler, whatever, and was traveling with you on tour. And they saw it on your Instagram. So saying that Mark was late or that he would have missed work a lot, I think it's a weak argument. Something better would have been to say that, hey, Mark was costing me money. He was causing me problems with, Khalyla, the subreddit, whatever. Or he could have said that, hey, simply Mark wasn't providing the results that I wanted. And in my opinion, would have made Schaub look a little bit better in this entire drama.
She's very sadistic to Bobby. You can find compilations of her attempting to humiliate him.
Yes.
I actually noticed it.
I've seen him.
Yeah. When they came out on the H3 podcast, that was really, I'm sitting there watching it going, look at the way that she emotionally steamrolls over Bobby. He's saying, I'm uncomfortable doing something. Please stop doing this. And she goes,
right.
No, don't be a Bobby. And I'm like,
right.
That's classic abusive, manipulative behavior. She's remorseless. I've seen excerpts where she's essentially...
Once Mark had confirmed that he was actually fired on his Instagram, comments and on social media. His first appearance was on the Rad Bar show. Now, this was through a FaceTime call on the phone and on camera, but it was a pretty interesting conversation in which he, went over all the details that we're about to see in a little bit. The conversation was actually pretty interesting, and Mark would again share the same details on other podcasts, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Then he did Richie the Barber show, in which he didn't really talk about Schaub, but this is when he completely trashed Khalyla for a while, and it was actually pretty funny.
She'll go, in therapy, we were talking about how we have to I'm like, shut the up, like, you make me fucking sick, and I hope that she watches this. It's always like this, like, oh, one of the things that we consider when I'm in the Philippines and I came back in Hawaii, and also I'm definitely not a psychopath if I talk calmly, Brendan, and then when we're on a private conversation, I'm going to scream at you, but let's just forget that. While I'm on camera, I'm going to seem calm and logical, and then I'm also going to call you a piece of shit loser at the top of my lungs on a and say, you know what, hey, let's just put this. She's a sadistic, narcissistic psychopath. I think at that time, Khalyla and Annie Letterman were like dogpiling on him, and I just thought that was gross in general, of like, you're trying to like Me Too this guy essentially. And guess what? Joe Rogan agrees. Do you think you'll see Annie Letterman on Joe Rogan anytime soon?
Probably not.
I know for a fact.
And the thing is that Mark and Khalyla have actually gone at each other in the past when the whole Tiger Belly, Brendan Schaub drama was going on. But nothing like this before, which is a clear sign that Mark Harley is not holding back and is going for blood.
At some point, she did bring up my name. She was like, oh, your little friend Mark. And also, during that time, I think I mentioned something about how this is what really is like almost could have potentially set things in motion, like for Khalyla to get upset, because I mentioned like that she was some other dude in Hawaii or whatever. And that that made Khalyla think that like Brendan was gonna release, but like, oh, no, but I just wanted to like expose you for being a two-faced. And
I do wonder if Khalyla will respond to this, because she didn't hold back when she wanted to talk about Brendan Schaub, even after the whole conversation happened. We also talked about this before, but Mark essentially confirmed that Khalyla and Annie Letterman both destroyed their chances of being on the Joe Rogan Experience, because it's true. Even though Joe Rogan wasn't, publicly involved in the entire drama, he was behind the scenes. There's even a comment or an answer from Mark Harley, which says that Joe Rogan actually screamed at Brendan Schaub for using his name to attack or to threaten Bobby Lee when the entire thing happened.
Secondly, like the Bobby Lee, like, is the master of the subreddit thing. That was so many levels of stupid. He hires this team of fake hackers, gives them cash and duffel bag, and knowing who he went through to get these hackers, like, in retrospect, I'm like, oh my God, like, why didn't you know that at first? Like, I would have been like, run, don't walk, run away from this person. You're probably getting scammed. In retrospect, you realize that, I think to some degree, that this all may not have been real, but like, he's not evaluating the 300 pages of evidence that he claims to have had. He still can't own up to that fact when his ticket sales are dwindling and the views are dwindling. He won't even acknowledge, like, hey, maybe the fact that you attacked and bullied this beloved comedian, that might have something to do with it. Oh, no, it's because of the recession. Sure thing, dude.
Now, this is very interesting, because prior to this, a lot of people were speculating that Brendan Schaub had actually made up the entire accusations against Khalyla and Bobby Lee, and saying that he had evidence about them being behind the subreddit that attacked them and all that stuff, just so he could have an excuse to attack them, because they talked about Brendan Schaub on the Trash Tuesday podcast, saying that, Brendan Schaub was hitting on Khalyla and Annie Letterman and all that stuff. So what Mark is saying is that at some point, Brendan Schaub did believe that somebody from Tiger Belly camp had something to do with the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, and the Trash Tuesday beef with Khalyla and Annie Letterman just happened to start around the same time. Now, whether the information that Schaub received was legit or not, that's a different story.
One of the things wrong with Brendan and his Instagram, and why he's really frustrated trying to get new followers, because he's been stuck at 1.2 million, he says, for like 6 years, because he bought a bunch of followers probably, but like, he just doesn't focus on good content. He thinks he's entitled to likes and views and all this stuff, and it's like,
how damaging was the Gringo Poppy to Schaub's reputation / views?
It was damaging to his views because he bought several 100,000 views on the Gringo Poppy in order to reach 1 million. And that's real, man.
Is that true? Is that it's a fact?
That's 100% factual. Brendan Schaub bought, I'm guessing, like 300 to 400,000 views, because remember it was around like 600,000, and he wanted it to get like, it's seemingly his only goal, his only metric of success, and it wasn't about reception. Fudge the number somehow, like, oh, I got 1 million views. You know, he's bragging, oh, it's almost at 2 million views. No, it's not. It's at 1.6 million views, and also like, you know, 300 to 400,000 views are paid for. And you know what that does to your channel? I don't know if you know anything about the algorithm and how buying followers and views show up, but it fucked his whole channel, because then the algorithm's like, wait, who's watching this? Like, he made this huge mistake just to get to 1 million views so we could have this celebration. And here's one little insight as he goes, I thought that was gonna like elevate me to the next level. Like, he was like really confused as to why the Gringo Poppy didn't launch him to like doing theater tours.
Now that we have confirmation from Mark, it does make sense to think that Brendan Schaub isn't really involved in his business as much as he says he is, and instead he just hires people or hires teams that he delegates the work to so that they can do it for him. But when it comes to social media, sure, you can hire people to do everything for you and help you with everything that they know that other people don't, but they can't really help you make original content or be likable online. And Mark actually reveals some pretty interesting details about how things work behind the scenes with Brendan Schaub's social media situation, because people already knew that he was having some sort of problem with it, with both of his social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, and also his YouTube account, which he just writes off as being shadow banned. So again, hearing it from Mark himself actually gives us some great insight, because not only did Brendan Schaub hurt his own reputation by doing everything that he has done so far, but he also physically nuked his own social media accounts and his YouTube channel by buying followers, subscribers, and views. And based on what Mark is saying, Brendan Schaub actually believes that he is shadow banned, which is just another example of how delusional or in denial he is, which doesn't help him to actually make a change. Because putting being shadow banned aside, one of the things that actually hurt his reputation a lot recently, or most recently, was going after smaller YouTubers and also loved comedians like Bobby Lee.
Right before we went live, I noticed that Unique said that he won the lawsuit. I don't know the details behind this, but what are your thoughts on?
Brendan spent several $100,000 apparently fighting this guy in court, you know, and he keeps bragging about like, I got these beasts of a lawyer, Justin Bieber's guy, and you know, this and that. Like, literally just took, you know, like $250,000 and flushed it down the toilet. If he did all that and then lost the case, my God, that would be hilarious.
Dude, I couldn't believe it.
One of the turning points in Brendan Schaub's reputation was when he tried to go after Unique, who was a small YouTuber back then, and didn't end up going well for him. Because as we all know, it's never a good look when a bigger person, you know, talking about being more famous, more successful, with more money, goes after somebody smaller, in this case a smaller YouTuber, after that YouTuber has said something bad about them or shared their experience being with them. Especially somebody like Brendan Schaub, who has a lot that could be exposed if people started looking. Back then, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of big ones like Charlie or Pinwinzo made videos talking about Schaub going after smaller YouTubers. And that whole thing made the haters or anti-fans become a little bit more real, because one thing is to trash people online. Let's say Brendan Schaub calling his haters or his ex-fans losers or whatever. And another thing is actually coming after them legally. Now, I'm not too informed with the case. I'm not really sure what happened, but based on what they said and what I see here on Unique's YouTube channel, he won. So if that's the case, congrats on that.
Brendan, if you're watching this, suing Mark is a bad idea for an NDA thing, because you'll have to pay. Mark can sue you right back for free.
Yeah.
For wage and hour violations, you moron.
No, that's a very good point. And you know, if I were to have like labor attorney friends who I've been speaking to, like, you know, they might say things like, "Oh, that's a terrible idea."
You don't know that, right? You do. Oh, really, dude?
Oh, really, dude?
Yeah,
No, so that's why,
more
you know,
than you'd think.
That's why I felt emboldened by this. Like, I didn't even look at my NDA, because I'm like, first of all, like, you know, I double dare you to sue me over telling exactly what happened to me, because you're a piece of shit. You know how terrible that would look. And that's part of how he spoiled his own reputation. It's going after this Unique guy. Right. Then the headline becomes, Brendan Schaub sues small YouTuber over joke.
One thing that did make me skeptical about Mark coming out and saying everything that he was saying was the fact that Brendan Schaub makes, or I believe he makes, a lot of people or most of his workers sign NDAs, a non-disclosure agreement, I believe. Now, Mark had some pretty good points about what that entire thing is. I don't know what was in his NDA, but in general, it's true. If somebody makes you sign one, it doesn't really give them the right to just do anything to you, whether it is bad, unethical, or illegal, and then it just gives them a free pass to do it. It is to keep a lot of things privately. In this case, I'm sure it does protect Brendan Schaub in a few things. I'm sure Mark is holding back on a lot of details, but overall, him sharing his experience working for Brendan Schaub, I mean, that's freedom of speech as far as I know, at least here in the U.S. Again, Brendan Schaub could still end up suing Mark, and all that stuff could happen, but it would be a horrible look for Brendan Schaub, especially after everything that has been going on.
It's actually been really cool connecting with a lot of people on Reddit. When I came into the AMA and kind of, as I said, came clean and took responsibility for the things that I feel like I need to take ownership of, and that, you know, that I did mistakes that I've made, and interacting with you guys or characterizing you guys, and even just like, you know, working for Schaub. Again, that's me. That's my decision. Nobody forced me to do that. So I take ownership of that. And it's been cool to kind of like get messages from people where they go, you can actually see above, like, you know, oh, 6 months ago you're talking shit to me. And then you're like, hey man, my bad. Like I had a different perception of you back then. And I, you know, after the AMA, that's really cool because I can do that too. And I hope people, you know, are able to have this fresh start.
If you're not familiar with Reddit or the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, then this might sound a little bit confusing. But essentially, the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, which is now at an impressive 110,000 members, they all, back in the day, used to hate Mark Harley. They would hate him and talk a lot of smack about him, to the point where they wouldn't even show Mark Harley's face in the entire subreddit as to not give him any attention. And like I mentioned before, Mark Harley would actually spend a lot of time and a lot of energy arguing with these people with lengthy paragraphs and psychoanalyzing them and actually talking about them on his whole podcast. Now, to be fair to Mark, at a first glance, if you look at the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, it might shock you, and you might think, holy this is just a group full of hate that is dedicated to trashing Brendan Schaub for no reason. But as you get more familiar with the entire situation and you start learning the truth, you can see why that group or why that subreddit became to be what it is now.
How often did Brenda piss in the sink?
Did
multiple times a day.
He did piss in the sink.
Oh, multiple times a day. Yeah. Only, you know, like the creative director, Mike Nell, who's a great guy. He communicated with him. Hey man, this really bothers me. You know what I mean? Like, this really bothers me that you piss in the sink. Everybody else goes into the hallway and goes to the bathroom. Like, you're pissing in the sink. That's not like a sink in the bathroom. It's a sink in the middle of the studio, like right next to all these glasses and that everybody uses. It's like next to the refrigerator. So like any splash down is going to be like on utensils and shit, you know? Mm-hmm. So he perceived it as being very rude, and Brendan agreed to not piss and then kept doing it.
Mark Harley sharing that Brendan Schaub actually pees in the kitchen sink in the common area, it has to be one of the funniest things about this entire situation, because Brendan Schaub has actually talked about this previously, and I just thought that he did it as a funny story to tell on the podcast. But to hear that he actually does that on a daily basis, it's almost unbelievable. That's the one thing that Brendan Schaub should actually address, because that is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard in my life. If somebody was peeing in the same place that I'm washing my coffee cup in or at, it's a big no for me. There's just no way. There's no excuse. I don't even see how it would happen unless they have no restroom inside the studio and there's an emergency and you can't make it out. But even then, there's just no excuse.
There is so much, to me, greatness about Mexico and Mexican culture, and like there's a richness there that, like, dating back to the ancient cultures of the Maya. Like, there's so much you could go if you're going like, I want to make this special themed around Mexico and my Mexican wife. There's so much to do.
No, you're 100%.
And he was just like, taquitos.
Yeah. Hot Cheetos.
Hot Cheetos. But it is the most basic observation. It's like, and I don't think his wife likes hot Cheetos. Like, I think it's probably made up.
No chance. She's like a fitness influencer. She's not eating that shit.
You guys ever seen her mom?
No.
Because how do you imagine her when he portrays her in the special?
I picture like
she
a
can't speak
grandma, like a
English.
like this,
abuelita.
like with like an abuelita, and she's
Yeah.
making like handmade tortillas with like a flour, like whatever. An image comes to mind.
Yeah.
Here's what she actually looks like. She's in her 50s. She looks like she could be late 40s. Gorgeous, like very pretty.
Wow.
Incredible body. Like she's a sexy 50-year-old woman who you wouldn't pick out of a lineup and say she's Mexican. You'd be like, oh, she looks like she could be like French, Spanish, Argentinian, something like that. Like, like there's nothing stereotypically Mexican about her besides a slight accent on top of otherwise perfect English. And then having to do that in front of your family, like what was there like a warning, like, hey, guys, I made all this shit up, you know?
Beige Frequency actually covered this a few years ago and did a very good job doing a documentary style video about Brendan Schaub's You'd Be Surprised special, how the entire thing was full of lies. Now, he had a very good point, which still holds true 3 years later, and that is, you know, that obviously in comedy there's a lot of lying. A lot of people's acts revolves around lies and fake stories, yada yada. But when it comes to Brendan Schaub, the way he lies is not really to support the joke or to make the story funnier, but instead is to make other people look bad and himself look better for no reason. And that clearly spills over to real life, because there are countless examples of Brendan Schaub just lying for no reason about the smallest things that he didn't have to lie. We could even just look at the most recent episode of The Golden Hour and we could find an example easily.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, Kanye's first one to do it.
That looks dangerous.
No, it's lit. We went to the concert. Insane.
You went?
My brother did.
So that's a different person than you.
I don't think they were supposed to.
Most people already kind of knew that Brendan Schaub would lie a lot, especially on podcasts, and it's not a new thing, but actually hearing it from Mark himself and his experience with it, it's pretty wild because it makes you look at every other situation a little bit differently. And here's the funny thing. We actually just talked about Ned or Carlos Mencia on the last episode. Is there a chance that Brendan Schaub's name is not his real name? What if he's the opposite of Carlos Mencia and he is really a Mexican dude with a super Mexican name who changed his name to sound a little bit more white so that he could be the Gringo Papi? Obviously not true, but that would be hilarious.
Would you ever think about working with Brendan ever again, or is that it? Enough's enough with this guy.
No, dude. He's, as you can see here, what kind of boss is that? He lies constantly. There's not a single person in this guy's life who he tells the truth to, his family included.
And he acts like a hypocrite because he's very, very judgmental about other people eating. So anytime he kind of makes you just feel on edge with eating because all the eating is like connected to him. Schaub will pay for your food. So I give it to him like he will take care of you when you're on the road, but it's kind of like, well, we're all eating in the same restaurant together. And what that gives him is the power to be like, dude, really? Like you ordered that? Or like, dude, slow down. Or he'll just go, please stop eating. Mark, please stop eating. Please stop eating.
That's annoying as shit.
It's annoying as shit because the reasons I started talking about it in the first place was I go, Brendan hasn't said anything yet. Every time I've seen somebody leave his life, he badmouths them with false claims after the fact and really revises history in a lot of ways. Like I remember one line he said was something to the effect of, Brendan historically has had a difficult time seeing the human element in the work people do for him. Wow. In other words, he treats people like appliances. Yeah. It's like why isn't this Keurig machine working? Throw it out, get a new one, you know?
If you're a fan of Brendan Schaub, the fighter and the kid, or just are simply aware of Brendan Schaub's career, you know that Brendan Schaub cannot take any criticism, and there are many examples of that online.
I saw him and Anthony Jeselnik talk before show one time in the green room, and he had referenced a time before when he was like trying to like give Anthony Jeselnik advice, and it was in front of other people, and he kind of framed it as like, oh yeah, Anthony snapped at me, but I'm like, well yeah, you were trying to like, he's one of the greatest living comics. Brendan tried to say, he's like, oh yeah, well you should try to like this, and like he was kind of giving him like, because Brendan in his mind is like, oh well I'm like a business and marketing guy, so I'm trying to give Anthony Jeselnik advice, but he made it seem like he's like, Anthony's talking this way, and it's kind of like, hey Brendan, I think I got it. Like he like gives him like, he says that and like winks at him. I'm like, that was Anthony Jeselnik's way of being like, hey, you idiot. Don't ever talk to me about anything relating to my career again.
But hearing Mark tell the Anthony Jeselnik story is completely insane. Because here's the thing. Brendan Schaub started his podcasting or internet career when the podcast boom was happening. He also had an insane lineup of help, which was, obviously Joe Rogan, Brian Callen, and everybody else like Bobby Lee, who gave him his most viewed episodes on his channel. He did start doing things that weren't common in the comedy world, like selling merch, promoting things on social media, and all that fun stuff. And also when the podcast boom happened, the economy was just going up every single month and every single year. So that just gave him, I guess, a false sense of confidence that he actually knew what he was doing and that he was solely responsible for the success that he and potentially Brian Callen had. That same cocky attitude that made him get mad at Anthony for not taking his advice is the same thing that doesn't allow him to change and see what actually is wrong with him.
One of the funniest things too is there's all these clips of him online saying, I'd never shit on anybody. Like, I don't hate, like, I'm not a hater at all. Privately, this dude shits on anybody. He'll shit on guys like Josh Wolf, like who was there for him hardcore when T-Fat-K was in trouble. And he'll kind of like just privately dismiss him, like, yeah, man, he can't sell tickets, so he's not funny. Like, whatever it is, like, he has this way of being like, oh, he can't sell tickets. It's like, you can't sell tickets. I've been at shows where there's 12 people in the audience.
So Brendan is aware that Steve-O and Tony Hinchcliffe, who he has like a weird issue with, he thinks Steve's like, he makes fun of Steve-O behind his back. He's like, the guy doesn't even do stand-up. He does like a PowerPoint presentation and it sucks. And you could be Joe Rogan and be like, he does a TED Talk. It's like everything's like he'll find a way to, the mental acrobatics that he does in order to dismiss other people who are more successful than him is astounding. But Tony Hinchcliffe's one of these guys who was like, I don't want that life. Like, oh, you can't even sell tickets. He's opening for Rogan or whatever. It's like, hey, yeah, what a shitty life, Tony. No, you can just guarantee it. Like, even if you're his best friend, if there's a way to dismiss you, if you're Trevor Wallace, he'll be like, oh yeah, he sells a bunch of tickets, but like the young people at his show don't buy enough drinks and food. It's like, really, dude?
Now, this one's pretty wild, but if you've seen any of the Fighter and the Kid episodes within the last year or so, you can clearly see that Brendan Schaub has no respect for Brian Callen. He constantly disrespects him on the podcast. He talks smack directly to his face, calls him a liar, whatever. And these are things that actually make it on the podcast and don't get edited out by Chin. And sure, some people might argue that he is just putting on a performance and it's a comedy podcast, whatever. But now listening to Mark say that Brendan Schaub actually trashes every single person in private blows my mind. That is one thing that I actually didn't expect, because obviously they put on this fake act when they are on air, which is the whole like, oh, he's the best, he's the funniest, great guy, never met him, the whole thing. It's just clearly false. And what's even funnier is that Brendan Schaub actually sees himself as higher than all the other podcasts because he doesn't do the drama thing, but he does do it in his private life and then puts on a fake performance, which is, it's just not a good look.
And also, like, look, here's what I'm going to throw out there. Brendan, go live with me on any podcast. Go live with me. Go live with me. And we can air it out and we can bring our evidence and we can discuss these things that you're claiming. So I'm going to challenge you to do that, knowing that you can't do that because you're an egomaniac who's been lying about the entire situation. So of course you won't go live with me.
At the end of the day, there's no way that Brendan Schaub actually engages with Mark on a podcast or talks to him anywhere. Besides peeing in the sink, Mark Harley hasn't really shared any career-ending details or anything insane for that matter. So instead, in my opinion, what Brendan Schaub should do is milk the situation and address it on his podcast, and he can really spin the narrative one way because, I mean, even though he doesn't have as many views, he still has those subscribers, which could potentially turn into a potential bigger reach than what Mark Harley is doing. And either way, the channel is suffering. They need views. Who cares at this point? Just make it into a drama channel. Nobody really cares. Nobody really is going to say, oh, Brendan Schaub is doing drama now. Nobody cares. Now, I think the biggest takeaway or lesson that we can learn from this situation is that if Mark Harley, who was completely hated by the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, who also hates Brendan Schaub, that's their main guy, if he was able to turn or to make everybody in that, or most people in that subreddit like him and accept him and welcome him in the subreddit, I think Brendan Schaub could do it too. Being realistic, there is no way that would ever happen. I think it's similar to the Carlos Mencia situation where Schaub just has that insane ego that will never allow him to admit that he was wrong and that he was defeated by the fans that he turned into haters. Again, if you're not familiar with the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, I suggest you check it out. A huge shout out because it's been wild this entire year. But yeah, I think that is all we have for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Obviously, you know the drill. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel to support. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. See ya.